Welcome to How to Hook an Agent. Today we're going to talk about what to do when you've already hooked not one, but several different agents. If you're new to this channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button for tips and information from an insider's perspective about the publishing industry and specifically about the literary agenting world in general. So it often happens that someone who has been out in the query wilderness for a good period of time, sending out their queries into the void and getting rejected again and again, will suddenly hit upon the winning formula. Maybe you've been working for some extended period of time and you've finally perfected your craft, or you've finally found the idea that hooks people, or you've got a query that was so engaging that more people were reading your book and they weren't reading before. Whatever has happened, everything has come together, and you now have not only one offer, but multiple offers from agents. First of all, if this happens to you, congratulations. It's a great feeling to be wanted, and it's a really good sign when multiple professionals are interested in your work that you'll be able to find an editor who is willing to lay down their resources to acquire your book as well. But how to decide between different agents? That's a really tricky question. And it can have several different possible factors involved that you are going to want to weigh. Broadly speaking, you have 3 or 4 different types of agents in general. The most common one that people are going to get offers from are newer agents. These are people who are fairly new to the industry. You might even be getting their very first offer that they've given out for representation, but chances are they do not have a large stable of authors they represent yet. The second category would be mid-level people, or people who are either mid-career, or they are people who are well established in the field, perhaps for a long period of time, but they don't have necessarily a big name in the field. I would count myself as one of those people. I'm not one of the super famous people in the industry, but I've also been doing it for over 10 years now. So I'm kind of a mid-level career person. And the third one are the superstar agents. These are the people, I won't name them, but they're the ones that everybody knows about. They represent some very big-named, high-powered writers, people who they have the ability to sometimes pull off auctions or bring in 7-figure deals on occasion. And these are the ones that everybody dreams about having represent them. So which of these, let's say you have offers from all 3 of these broad categories of agents, which should you choose? I don't think that the answer is really obvious. The one that most people seem to want would be a big name agent who is super famous and has lots of big name clients. This person obviously has some advantages. If they believe in you, they can perhaps push your book into a realm of opening offer that is the sort of thing that could completely make your career. The downside is, apart from the fact that these people are generally very, very selective, is that your career is going to be small fry to them, chances are, most likely, unless they can get you a 6-figure deal. It might be that you're just not going to be nearly as important. And how could you be? Naturally, an agent needs to spend most of her energy and effort on the people who are bringing her a good paycheck. And so if you are a smaller player, you could easily be foisted off for the majority of day-to-day work with their assistant, a junior agent, and perhaps worst case scenario, you're ignored entirely. This is what happened to me during, as I've mentioned before in other posts, that I also have a career under a pseudonym as a writer. And when I started off, this was back in around 2008, I believe, before I became a literary agent, I went through the process and I found a number of different agents, and the one I selected was a well-known agent with a very well-known agency located in Midtown Manhattan with a big, beautiful office with windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. And I was very impressed. And the agent started to talk about things like auctions with $600,000 advance, like something similar she'd seen. Well, the downside of that was my book went out. It did not get a big offer. We only went to the bigger players. I had one of them suggest a rewrite and a resubmission, and another one who said she might be willing to look at this book again, after some sort of revision. She wasn't 100% passing on the book, but fairly close. And my agent at the time was disinterested in pursuing those. It seemed like a lot of work. She said in her experience, those things rarely pan out. From my experience, I had no contract and nothing going on. And so I was very frustrated by that. And then I turned in my second book and was essentially, after several months, dumped. The other problem being is it took so long from the time that I signed with that agent until we went out on submission. I think it was about 6 months. It took several weeks to get some notes back. They were fairly minor, so I went through those in a few weeks, sent it in, and then just silence. I just was not a high enough priority once I had been signed by that agent. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I have heard stories like that from people who had high-powered agents, and then maybe they had a $10,000 or $15,000 contract, and their agent just wasn't all that interested in working with them. Well, if it's you and you have a $10,000 or $15,000 contract, that's your career. It's very, very important to you. So then on the opposite end of the spectrum, and I've never been in the super high profile agent category, so I can't really speak to what it's like to be that person. But I was in the newbie stage at one point. And the obvious downside of that is your new agent might not know what he or she is doing. They might not have contacts in the industry. They might be signing a lot of people whose books they can't sell. Maybe that doesn't matter to you if you have no other agent. They could just be terrible at what they do and encourage you to sign a bad contract. A lot of times they're not going to be working full-time as an agent. They're going to be part-time agents. Maybe if you're fortunate, they're working for a larger agency and they're handling some foreign rights things, or they're working in conjunction with a larger agent. Those assistants very frequently are people who are trying to get their foot in the door as agents too. So, but you don't know. So there's a good chance I hear it's probably more common that I get pitches from people who were once with a beginning level agent who couldn't make it work, and within a year or two they were out. They didn't know how to go on submission. They just couldn't get it done. The obvious positive side of working with someone like that is, first of all, you're more likely to get the offer in the first place. They don't have a newer agent is unlikely to have a full list. And that was certainly the case for me. There are people I signed early on, some of whose books I sold, some of whose books I didn't sell, but people who I probably wouldn't sign nowadays simply because they needed too much developmental work. And I didn't have the time. I had the time, or I had the energy, and now I've got a full list with a lot of writers who I represent, and I just don't necessarily have the time or the energy or enthusiasm that I had a decade ago. So the reality is that person, if you get in on the ground floor with a young and hungry up and coming agent, could do really great things for your career. Your chance of failure with that person is probably higher as well. And then you have the mid person. Well, one more thing I'll say about the newer agent is So knowing that I was in that situation, I frequently found myself making a pitch to someone with competition from more well-known agents. And I still sometimes get in that situation. It's, as I mentioned early on, it's interesting how many people have zero interest and then suddenly they have multiple people interested. It just indicates that things have come together with this particular book or with their career. So I would frequently find cases where there was one, maybe two, three other agents involved. And so I had to make my pitch. And the way I did it at that time, and this could be the case with other newer agents too, is I made a pitch based on my responsiveness, and I made a pitch based on my ability to give good professional feedback because I already had a background as a writer. I had had some professional sales and publications already. Um, I had attended a couple of prestigious workshops. I went to Clarion, for example, so with science fiction and fantasy writers, and I'd had some professional sales in that genre and elsewhere as well. And so I had a good concept of writing itself. And I think it's a really good pitch for someone to make to say, well, look, I'm the first person to get back to you. I was the most responsive. You sent me the book a week ago and I'm already back here with your answer. So if I was the first one, trying to jump in ahead of time, I signed some people who I might not have otherwise. Some of those people's books I didn't sell, some books I did. But I also made the point that while at that time I was new, my colleague had 15 years of experience. We'd worked together on contracts. She'd helped me come up with my submission list. I had a really good hit rate on my pitches from getting requests from editors. So those were my selling points at the time. Well, I'm now in that mid-career stage where I'm busier and more selective. I still think I'm a lot more responsive than the average person. I don't want to be contributing to all of the negatives of this industry in terms of people responding, requesting manuscripts, and then just going silent, ghosting you, sending into your agent, never knowing if they're going to respond. I never wanted to be someone to contribute to that, partly because I'm someone who had gone through this process myself, and to a certain extent still go through it with ups and downs and contracts and things. So I wanted to be someone who could be reliable, who would give you straight answers. So I still have that feature, but if someone looks into me a little bit and they can see that I've been in the industry for a long time, and I have, in addition to agenting experience, professional experience, speaking and presenting at conferences, and I'm not a newbie. I'm not going to mess up your contract. I'm not going to jump on a contract eager to get it done just because it's a contract. If it's terrible, I'll be straight up and tell you what that is. So that sort of person, you're going to get some offers from them too, and it's maybe a mixture of the pros and it is true that I'm far less likely than the biggest name person to get that big auction going, but I'm also not going to be the person who's going to dump you or just throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall and see if their assistant can do all the heavy lifting while they try to get an auction going. And then if it happens, it's great. And if it doesn't happen, that person's dead to the world. So depending on how confident you are about having to jump back into things, I always give people 2 or 3 shots, even if we are not selling their first book, and before we start to have a serious talk about maybe, going our separate ways. But I'm always going to be interested in whatever your next book is. If you get a $5,000 offer and that's the best we can do, but it's from a legitimate house, then we're going to pursue that. I'm not someone who is in this just to get those big superstar deals. So I'm speaking a little bit in general and a little bit specifically too. So going back to this original story about my agent who dumped me, I then had another agent where I co-wrote a book with a friend of mine who'd had a few books published. We didn't sell that one either. He was one of those people who throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, and then, it was so hard to tell what he was even doing at least with the first agent, I got feedback on, I got to see the actual emails from the editors instead of just hearing, yeah, so-and-so passed and so-and-so passed, and I didn't even know who was pitching that second one. Then my current agent, because I don't represent my own stuff for obvious reasons. Maybe they're not obvious, but I'll talk about that in a different place. But my later agent then managed to sell the project and made a little series out of it. And that book that was rejected, that the first agent I had didn't ever want to pursue, has sold roughly 150,000 copies. Although its glory days are behind it, I had a lot of success with that book, and it was ready to go out or close to it. And so that's a story for a different day. Anyway, that might help you if you're facing the envious position of having a lot of agents to choose from. The only other thing I would remind you is there's no rush in this process. So if someone was interested a week ago, they're going to be interested next week too. You can tell people I need a couple weeks to make a decision. If they don't want to hold on for that, that'll tell you something. And similarly, if you tell someone who has your book, I'd like to make a decision by the end of the month, I have this other offer, and they can't get back to you in that period of time, and they want a full month or something, that should tell you something too. They're never going to get more responsive in the future than they are at the moment where they've got competition for someone. Anyway, good luck out there. Hopefully you'll find yourself in this situation before long.